Thanks, Dr. Putnam. And now that'll conclude our formal presentations for this morning. So this morning we heard from John Elitraj, who talked about IBH, and then Dr. Markish presented on Rio and surveillance information, and then James Mills spoke about salmonella and our GPS approach, and then we just heard from Dr. Putnam explaining autogenous vaccines and our facilities. So now I'm going to transition to our question and answer session, and we've received several questions, so we'll attempt to answer as many of these as possible while also respecting the time that we have remaining. So if we're unable to answer all questions, we will attempt to respond to them via email. Now I'd like to welcome back all four of our presenters. Please rejoin us. All right, there's Marshall, Milos, James.
I'm here, Gary, but my video's not working.
Okay, all right. That's probably for the best. Thanks, John. All right, John, the first question we have is for you. The question is, please describe the in vivo challenge model that you recommend for determination of adenovirus relative pathogenicity.
Basically two different models that you can utilize, an embryo model and a chick challenge model. My experience with embryo models is, of course, you're going to see the typical lesions of inclusion body hepatitis associated in embryos that you would see in the field with the intranuclear inclusion bodies or the swollen liver, pale kidneys, definitely within embryos. And again, that inoculation after isolation, it doesn't have to be even attached titration of the virus, but inoculation embryos, typical signs. The embryo inoculation either at 6 days of age with yolk sac or 9 days of age with a CAM, and the disease should show up quite readily in an embryo model with those particular lesions. Now, in a bird model, there's variable models that have been utilized and published all the way from day of age all the way to 2 weeks of age. In the models that I've used in the past, I was in the middle. I settled at 7. I had my virus titrated anywhere between 10 to 4, 10 to 6, an IM inoculation, and variable results that we would see from inoculation of different viruses that we saw associated with inclusion beta hepatitis. Some we would see no mortality, minimal microscopic lesions and PCR detection, and then some we would see a complete mortality. So basically the in vivo model within chickens are SPF chickens. Day 7 is where I settled at, but people do it anywhere from day 1 to day 14. And it's a quick assessment. I mean, the disease, as mentioned, happens usually within the first 5 days, you see the incidence of mortality happen within these challenge birds.
All right, thanks, John. The next question is for Milos. This question is, flocks with Rio-induced lameness will result in extremely high GMTs. Would you expect that for Rio-induced intestinal disease?
Right. And it will depend on how, I think this was from Dr. Burleson, it will depend on how pathogenic or invasive the virus is. So some of the milder viruses that can still cause enteric disease, they're not as invasive systemically, so they won't affect the GMT of the ELISA as much as some of the more pathogenic ones.
All right, the next question is for James Mills. James, the question is, can you trace a salmonella isolate from humans back to a broiler flock or a breeder flock?
Well, that's the question everybody's worried about. I personally don't have any experience doing that. I think what you can do is look for associations, and honestly, I'm not familiar enough with the process of doing that to properly answer the question to how it's done. But I think there are certain markers that you can look for that might be associating a strain at a certain facility with an outbreak. And then, if they're closely related, then maybe a deeper dive into the sequence to kind of show, hey, this isn't related, or this is related. But there still has to be an epidemiological link to determine the source of that outbreak. I think even with some genetic information that may strongly suggest they're related, I firmly believe that there should be more than just genetic information to link an isolate to an outbreak. But I don't know the mindset behind the regulatory agencies looking specifically at genetic information.
Okay, thanks, James. This question is for Dr. Putnam. The question is a two-part question. How long can an isolate be used in a custom vaccine, and how many isolates can you put in a custom vaccine?
The length of time that an isolate can be used in a custom vaccine depends upon when it is fully characterized. We typically classify that as its birth date, and I believe it's 18 months from the birth of that isolate, and then it can be extended for an additional 12 months if we can show that it's effective in the customer. I believe that's correct. Second part of that question was, trying to remember, Gary, what was it?
How many isolates?
Oh, how many isolates? Yeah, that's always a good one. You have to remember that when you add more isolates to your product, you basically are diluting them each isolate, and that the question about that always comes into play in terms of, are you having an impact on that antigen's ability to properly immunize the bird and protect the bird. We typically try to stay around no more than 5 from a bacterial standpoint. We don't mix bacterians and viral antigens because there's just too much disparity in size. We're not comfortable with the immune response. From a viral standpoint, we typically try to stay around 5 as well, or not get more than that unless we just absolutely can't do anything else other than that.
Thanks, Marshall. This question is for Milos. What do you think is the reason for lack of correlation between serotypes and genotypes? And do you think that sequencing complete genomes will provide the information needed to accurately predict serotypes?
Right. So reovirus has several different surface proteins against which neutralizing antibodies are made, and sigma C is one of those proteins. So the serotype will constitute all of those antibodies together. So that's why the correlation between just looking at a single gene and serotype is not there. As far as full genome sequencing and using that, I'm hopeful that will happen. We certainly do it with human reoviruses, with influenza viruses. So I'm hopeful that someday, that will be established, but we're not there just yet.
Okay, thanks. This question is for Dr. Elatraj. Question is, do you have to include all adeno serotypes in a vaccination program targeting IBH?
No, definitely not. I think that's why it's important. The laboratory aspect of laboratory assistance in this is very important to make sure that you're looking at the specific serotype that is affecting your flocks. As mentioned, most of them are within the U.S. Most of them that we see are 8 and 11, or various forms of 8 and 11. Sometimes we do get a 2 or 6 or 7 associated with inclusion body hepatitis. But for the most part, the ones that has been isolated, identified by the laboratory, and either shows pathogenicity through chick inoculation or through embryo inoculations are the ones to put into your bottle. One thing that I can say from experience as well is that strains within serotypes are a variable as well. So although that you might find a particular serotype, say 8A, it might not be able to neutralize an 8B or 11. Whereas you can get sometimes in some publications, you can see where another strain from a particular serotype can somehow cross neutralize other serotypes. So it's very particular to analyze the strain that you are going to select and put into your bottle. So I think if you have continuing problems with inclusion body hepatitis, then you might have to start looking and start hunting and finding that particular isolate that would be in addition to the one that's in the bottle to make sure that you're getting protection across the board. So it's not a simple cut and dry.
John, this question is also for you. And the question is, how good is maternal antibody transfer to progeny with IBH?
Very good. Very good. I mean, that's the way to fight the disease. I think in all the challenge studies that I've done prior, and going back to, and Dr. Rosenberger asked me the question about the challenge studies, going back to when I first started within the industry, these were some of the challenge studies that I were doing. I couldn't reproduce the disease in broilers. I could have reproduced it in SBF, but in broilers that had maternal antibodies, very difficult to do that. So it's number one target to make sure your breeders are vaccinated.
Okay, and this is our last question. This question is for Milos, and the question is, how well does conventional live Rio vaccine protect against the variants found these days?
It does not. It's S1133 like serotype, and all the variants since 2011 are different serotypes than that. And as a matter of fact, in many cases when we put S1133 in broiler chicks and then they're exposed, and this was reproduced experimentally, when you vaccinate with a live Rio and expose them, the disease presentation is way worse than if you only expose them to the challenge virus.
All right, thank you. With that answer, we're out of time this morning. I want to thank our four speakers and thank each of you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your attention. Our marketing team will be emailing you a survey of your experience with the Ceva live event. And for further questions or comments, please stay connected with us at cevapoultry.us. And we look forward to seeing everyone in person, hopefully very soon in the near future. Until then, be safe. Thank you.